And this is something that we're really excited to be able to speak with you about today. So we're going to dive on in. Today we're going to be talking about hiring a multiculturally competent workforce. And we want to hire people for our organization who are culturally competent. But when we say that, what do we mean by that? Well, essentially, cultural competence is the ability to operate and or work effectively within a culture. But it's important to recognize that cultural competence is a construct that's very complex, it's multifaceted, and as you are developing a multiculturally competent workforce, it's something that you and your organization really needs to define for yourself. What do you mean by that? How do you want individuals to display this competence? And when we talk about multicultural competence, what we're talking about is the ability to accurately understand and adapt behavior to cultural difference as well as commonality. And so as an organization, it's your responsibility to define very clearly for your employees what that means and how you want that to be exhibited, what those skills look like, and how do they display those through their actions and through their words. And first, we're going to discuss briefly what is the purpose of hiring for a diverse and socially just staff. And it's likely that working in student affairs, many of you have already heard of the many advantages to hiring a diverse staff. Research clearly demonstrates that there are organizational benefits in hiring a diverse staff, including greater productivity, generating more creative solutions, and an improvement in group work overall. And there are also clear benefits to our students. Students learn both formally and informally in a diverse educational environment. And being exposed to diverse identities and ideas generates creative solutions, and again, it increases productivity. So we can extrapolate these findings to our hiring practices. Not only will our organizations benefit from increased diversity and an increased awareness of justice issues, but our students also benefit from seeing diverse identities on our staff. They can become more exposed to new ways of thinking. They learn to interact across identities in a positive way. They develop their own multicultural competencies. And that's all based on the representation of identities present within our organizations. So that's one of the reasons why we feel it's so important to talk about this topic, is because we know that this directly affects and benefits our students. And what it all boils down to is that we're a model. The students living in our residence halls, but even more than just living in our halls, living on campus, interacting with our cultural centers, getting tutoring, experiencing all of the different activities we in student affairs provide to them, they need to see us as a positive representation of diverse and socially just spaces. That is going to increase their retention to the university. It's going to help them persist to graduation. It's going to make them feel like they are welcome and safe on our campus, and that they're going to learn from that experience as well. So we have an obligation to be that model for them and model what it looks like to be multiculturally competent and have a diverse staff. And we're going to talk a little bit about how we foster that, and I'm going to turn it over to Vicki, and she's going to be talking about affirmative recruitment for us.
Yeah, so affirmative recruitment is basically a model that we wanted to present to give you an idea about how to really do this, how to create a diverse staff and hire a diverse staff. Because if you're on the webinar, we know that you're interested in this, but what is the real framework or the action steps that you can take to implement this in your organization? So one way to do this, or one action plan, is an affirmative recruitment approach. It's similar to, if you've heard of or talked about affirmative action before, but also slightly different. So really, affirmative recruitment is a concept that encourages organizations to take positive steps to improve work opportunities for people of difference. So whether that's women, racial and ethnically underrepresented people, people with disabilities, all from a host of different identities. So a lot of times people think, or I think, race and gender or sexual orientation when I first think about recruiting a diverse staff. We really want to open that up to all levels of diversity, all different backgrounds, identities, and experiences. And really, affirmative recruitment is a set of specific and results-oriented programs that an organization commits to institutionalize. That's really important. It has to be something that's really starts to be ingrained in your culture and something that comes up all the time, instead of just when we post a position or just start a process. It's really a year-long experience. It's also designed to build diverse, qualified application pools based on your demographic goals. So in terms of demographics, the affirmative recruitment approach doesn't say necessarily that you need to base your staff off of the demographics of your student population. So for example, CU Boulder is a predominantly white institution, but we know through focus groups and surveys that we've done that our students of color say they feel like they really don't have a place on campus. I was in a meeting just last week, and some focus groups reported back that students of color are reporting that they feel like they're stared at on campus. That's not an atmosphere that we want to create. So we know that if we can hire staff of visible difference, we might be able to at least connect with those students. We also know from our research and theory that if students can connect with our staff, they have a better chance of graduating. They have a better chance of staying with us, of living with us. And we want to have those goals for our institution. So then really looking at what affirmative recruitment is and is not, going on to the next slide here. So what it is a commitment of the institution to really value recruiting and selecting a diverse staff. So really looking at our current staff, assessing where we are, and seeing what is missing, what identities are missing, backgrounds, skills, experiences, what do we need to add into our organization to make it more effective. It also provides our search committees and organizations with a more thoughtful process that acknowledges and interrupts our unconscious bias. So we all know that we have bias. Bias is ingrained in us. We know that. We know we can't change that. But what we can do is really be aware of our bias. And we're going to talk about that a lot more towards the later half of our webinar. But we know that oftentimes we hire people that look like us, that act like us, that talk like us because we connect with them. So really this affirmative recruitment approach looks at that and asks, why are we hiring people? What are they adding to our organization that we currently don't have, that we want to diversify? In addition, just recruiting a diverse pool of applicants, and we're going to go through some action steps about how to do that, and then following through that and hiring them. And really considering difference in what our organization is lacking. All right, so what it is not, what affirmative recruitment is not is reverse discrimination or reverse racism or discrimination. So we're not hiring people because of their race, their gender, their sexual orientation. We're hiring people because they bring in different skills, experiences, backgrounds, different perspectives to the table. It's also not a method to hire unqualified candidates. So we want to hire the best of the best, those stellar applicants and top-notch people. We're going to talk a little bit more as well about how to really do that. So really looking at the first steps of an affirmative recruitment approach is assessing our current workforce. So really what you want to do is bring in all levels of your organization to have this conversation. So an affirmative recruitment plan needs to have that buy-in from top leadership all the way down and in between. So all levels of the organization need to be involved in this conversation because really your entire residence life department, all of your staff are really recruiters and interviewers and are going to help you in this process. You also really want to assess your current workforce. So you could possibly have an outside department come in and do this, but it can be internal as well, just by bringing up those conversations. So all identities need to be considered in all forms of diversity. And you really want to set goals. So instead of just saying, I want to recruit and hire a diverse workforce, you really need to analyze for your specific institution what that means. And that's going to be different for any institution or region across the country. One example that we wanted to bring up was to kind of get a sense of what this looks like or why we would do this is school districts in the K through 12 grade range hiring male teachers. So that's been taught for the last, I would say, many years, just because in general those school districts lack male teachers. So really what they're trying to do is get those perspectives to the table, have male teachers as role models for their students to serve them better. So it's very similar to what we're doing in higher education. We want to hire a diverse staff that can connect with our students, that students have to go to for role models and be able to create those interactions that have their living experience with us be more positive. Other things, just tips in terms of an affirmative recruitment approach is concerning internal promotions. So at CU Boulder, for example, we have a lot of internal promotions in our staff, especially from hall director to an area coordinator or assistant director role. And that's fine. That could work great for your institution. especially if you have really strong people and a strong team. But you really want to look at internal promotions and ask you the question if it's helping or hindering your affirmative approach. Are you hiring the best candidate and candidates of difference if we're only promoting internal people? You also want to look at interim positions. So one tip that I learned from this conference that I went to, the Affirmative Recruitment Institute, is we don't want to place people in interim positions who are going to apply for the job once it's posted, because it's really hard to not give somebody a position who's in the interim role. So you really want, again, to focus on recruiting diverse candidates and making sure you're hiring the best candidate possible in terms of your goals for an affirmative recruitment approach. Another piece of this affirmative recruitment plan is the willingness to consider less experience while maintaining minimum qualifications. So for example, if a hall director is in a role for 4 years, does that make them a better applicant than somebody who is in a hall director position for 5 years or 10 years? Possibly, but maybe not. So you want to really look at experience, but really minimum qualifications of experience, and then seeing if it's possible to consider that less experience if there's a candidate of difference. They have the same skills, have the same knowledge, and experience level. Another thing to really consider is transferable skills. So at University of Colorado, we focus a lot on crisis and conduct, especially when we're hiring for our hall director position. But we've this year really focused on what kinds of skills does a person need to have to do crisis and conduct effectively, even if they don't have that experience. And if they don't have that experience, is it trainable? Can we train them on how to do a conduct meeting, or how to follow the duty manual and really respond effectively to student needs and concerns, especially in a crisis situation? So thinking of experiences outside of residence life and seeing if those candidates, especially again if they're candidates of difference or candidates that we want to see in our pools, if those people can also rise to the top. So where does your affirmative recruitment plan really begin? And it's really networking. So this is I would say, in my personal opinion, the most important part of an affirmative recruitment plan that you can have, and really where your plan begins. So if you don't have a networking plan, you really need one to really make sure you're networking a diverse pool of candidates. And what that means is before a job even posts, you want to have people who you want to send that job posting to. So once it does post. So for example, at the University of Vermont, where this information is coming from, the Affirmative Recruitment Institute, in residence life, they give all of their staff members $15, and when they go to a conference or an event or professional development activity, just to bring people to coffee and talk about the institution. So even if a job isn't posted yet, or they don't even have an opening in sight, they're really just talking up their institution and selling their institution. And specifically, they're networking and looking for people who have those qualities, skills, experiences, identities, or backgrounds that they want in the organization, and specifically diverse staff or diverse applicants. So then when a position does post, then the search committee and the search chair has already a pool of applicants that they're sending out that information to and encouraging them to post for the job. And hopefully that candidate is already excited because they already talked to somebody about the institution and how great it is to work there. You also want to, when you're networking, you want to look for people who display that cultural competency and have an interest and a passion for serving students in a culturally competent way. Then the next step in terms of your action plan is really looking at your recruitment and your selection tools. So the first thing here is really looking at your position description. Including multicultural language throughout the position description. So in my institution, we have basically social justice is that category at the bottom, 10% social justice. What we're working on for next year is incorporating that multicultural language throughout. So what we want to look at is what does cultural competency look like in student conduct, or roommate conflicts, or emergency response, or administration, and really adding that language and focusing on culturally competency throughout the job instead of just being one aspect of it that's 5 or 10% of the position. You also want to look at comfort and interest versus commitment. So when you're hiring candidates and interviewing candidates, you want to look for people who have that commitment instead of maybe that interest level. So it's great that people are passionate about social justice or interested in that topic, but you want people who are really committed, who are taking action and moving forward in their cultural competency, and maybe seeking out professional development activities or trainings that are really increasing their knowledge and their cultural competency. Or maybe they're even just having conversations with staff and asking those questions, but making sure that you're looking for that in the job process. The next part of this is really selecting a search committee who is open to an affirmative recruitment plan. So your search committee needs to be on board, or I think it's going to cause a lot of slowdowns, a challenge, and they really need to understand what you're trying to do and what your goals are. It's really important for the hiring authority or the person, maybe director of your department, or the person who has that final say in who gets hired, to really lead this charge and to share with the search committee what the goals are of the organization in terms of diversifying the staff. One activity that I learned at this institute that I attended is called the RIP activity. And basically what it was is to possibly do with the search committee is thinking about ways or excuses that we make really that we can't hire a diverse staff. So an example that was brought up, this was at the University of Vermont, so very similar to Burlington, Vermont, similar to Boulder, Colorado. And one of the things that came up was, for example, we can't hire diverse staff because there's a lot of skiing here and people of color don't ski. So obviously that's a huge assumption that we're making about people of color, and then also that everybody in Colorado skis. So basically the idea is thinking about those things that come into our heads or excuses that we make about why we can't recruit or bring people to our institution, people of difference or people that we want to come here, people of diversity, and then really challenging those assumptions and finding out, you know, what is the real reason, or are we just making excuses or not thinking about our bias. Another piece of your recruitment and selection tools is thinking about your interviewing, your resume reviews, interview questions, and looking at, do candidates of marginalized identities score lower? And if they do, why is that? Is some of our bias ingrained in there? Are we just trying to hire people who are like us, who connect with us? Or what is that bias in there? Another tip, if you will, is posting in publications that have a diverse reading population. So a lot of times you can get reader profiles to see if it's web-based or you're posting somewhere, or posting articles, or posting positions. Where are you posting them? Is it hireajobs.com, the Chronicle, studentaffairs.com? What kinds of reading profiles do those publications have? I'm really looking at that. Another piece of this is really getting your position out to everywhere you can. So whether that's listservs, SJTI, the Social Justice Training Institute, or the AIMHO listserv, great resources, but also places like the Oshkosh Placement Exchange or TPE or C3 to really get that posting out there. Even if you can't attend the conference, just even posting in those places really can help attract and get your position out to a diverse group of candidates. You also want to think about recruiting versus attracting your candidates. So what recruiting means is really identifying the positive attributes of your position. So whether it's the salary, your benefits, professional development you gain, maybe you have an amazing team that you're doing a lot of professional development with, or you have a lot of goals and initiatives in your organization that are unique. You want to communicate those, come up with a list of those, and communicate those to your candidates so they know that they're capable of your organization and are going to do well there. You also want to think about attracting. So what attracting means is really identifying the positive attributes of your region, state, your town, whether it's food, culture, weather, activities. So basically things to do outside of work. So the candidate knows that they're capable of having a life outside of their job and outside of their employment. And really, you add those together, so we know that recruitment and attraction, doing both of those, you're going to get higher retention outcomes and have a diversity of candidates or a more diverse pool of candidates. So then in terms of continuing on in your action plan, other steps that you can take, first is work to dismantle or lessen our unconscious bias. So like we said, bias is just ingrained in us. So this involves a lot of training and work, especially with your search committee. This year in our hall director and assistant hall director search committee, we're really talking in our department about who's missing from the table. And we're really focusing on candidates that are bringing something different to us. So when we're having those conversations about who's moving forward to second interviews or who's coming to campus, we're asking the question, what is this candidate bringing that we currently don't have? And looking at our goals and seeing if those candidates are meeting that. So just something that we're working towards. Thinking about Skype interviewing versus phone interviewing. This year it's been interesting. We've been trying to do Google Hangout interviews, and when that person comes up on the screen, I automatically have a lot of assumptions in my head, and I'm thinking, are they a good candidate? What are they going to bring to CU? They might not even start answering the interview questions yet, but I'm already thinking about my assumptions and my bias. So just training your search committees to be aware of that bias that can come up, especially in interview settings. Scoring really needs to be talked about in depth. So scoring is hard because a lot of times it can be opinion-based in someone's opinion, especially if you're interviewing. So you really want to talk about what does the best answer look like? What does an average answer look like? What does an answer look like that's not good, and why? So then it's not just somebody who's getting that feeling that they might not be a great candidate, but it's really because they're not displaying those skills and experiences that you want. And the search committee should be able to answer interview questions really well. You want to make sure that you're not asking questions just to stump the candidate, and you're trying to get that multicultural competency. You're trying to assess that throughout your questions. And then in regards to that, you really want to make sure your interview questions evaluate the candidate on cultural competency. You can do that throughout your interview. Instead of maybe just having that one diversity and social justice question, maybe it's a question that infuses everything. So we have a question for our hall director candidates that's about emergency response and vandalism, but it also is a situation that involves gender on a floor, and really talking about how the candidate is going to incorporate that into their conversations when they follow up with residents. So that's something that you can do to really infuse cultural competency throughout your interview questions. So be willing to consider less experience. We talked a little bit about that earlier on. So wondering if just because a hall director has been a hall director for 10 years, does that make them more qualified for a mid-level position than somebody who's been there for 3 years or 4 years? Not necessarily. So you just want to have that in your head and ask that question. And then basically what an affirmative recruitment approach says is if you're making decisions on candidates, and oftentimes if you have a strong pool, it's really hard to make that final decision. So really what you want to look at is if the candidates are equally qualified, you're having a hard time really assessing which one is going to be best for our organization. The affirmative recruitment plan really says hire the candidate of difference to get that diversity, that different perspective to the table that you might be missing in your organization. All right, so we're moving on then to the interview day. So once you look at your selection tools, you talk about scoring, you train your search committee, really looking forward to the interview day is important. So this is really for all candidates, but in terms of affirmative recruitment approach, also really important. So you really want to first think about who are your hosts, those people that take the candidate to dinner maybe, pick them up from the hotel, usually the first initial point of contact from your institution, possibly pick them up from the airport. You want to hand select those people. My personal opinion is the host is one of the most important people in your search process and on the interview day. So you really want to place candidates together that you think will fit well with the host. So if you know, for example, a candidate is interested in learning more about the GLBT community or wants to get involved in that in your institution, and you have a staff member who's involved in that community or possibly works with your resource centers or collaborates with them. You want to pair those people up and make sure that you're being really intentional about who your hosts are and who you place them with. You also want to look at your search partners and really see, is there other departments on campus who really work with that candidate or who possibly would work with that candidate on a daily or weekly basis and make sure they're part of that process. You also want to focus on departments or units who are also working towards diversifying their staff, who are going to be in line with your goals and who know your goals about recruiting a diverse staff and hiring a diverse staff before they go into the interview process. Another piece about the interview day is really scheduling. So with scheduling, you want to be kind. So this is with all candidates. So making sure they have enough breaks, making sure they know where the restrooms are, that they have water for the day. You just want to remember that you're recruiting them and selling your institution as much as they're selling themselves to you. Another piece of, specifically for an affirmative recruitment approach, is asking why you're incorporating different sessions into the day and what the purpose is, what you're trying to assess. So for example, at CU Boulder, we used to have our hall director candidates do a presentation about what they could bring to our organization. And when we really asked ourselves why we're having candidates do a presentation, we didn't really have the answer. We enjoyed the presentations, and it gave us a little bit of knowledge about the candidate, but really our hall directors don't present to large groups unless, it's their staff training or individual staff training or conferences, things like that, and we felt like we could train on that and do some professional development on that, so we took that presentation out. But we did add in this year, we have a social justice case study to really focus on cultural competency. So we're focusing on hiring candidates who have that cultural competent mindset and who are able to bring that to our organization. So that's something that we added into the interview day that we think will tell us more about the candidate. Other things you want to consider are, where do your interviews take place? So facilities say a lot about your organization or the space that you're showing candidates. So thinking about the spaces that you have, and then again, providing breaks, beverages, that's for all candidates. And remember that you're building a relationship. So from the start of your process, from when you post the position to they apply, you're building a relationship throughout. And one thing that's important in terms of an affirmative recruitment approach is, even if a candidate doesn't work out in your process, especially if they're a candidate that you're recruiting, candidate of difference, person of difference, is bringing that different experience, skill, or identity background into your organization, you want to continue building that relationship with them. So following up with them, keeping in touch, making sure you explain to them why they didn't get the position and encourage them to apply for the future. And then when you have a position open, maybe it's a mid-year position, somebody leaves, you automatically have that person to connect with who you think would be a great candidate fit to your organization, but maybe weren't the best fit during that current process that you're going through. Another piece of the interview day is asking the candidate who they would like to connect with on campus. So this goes back to making sure that the staff member is going to feel like they have a home, that they have people that they are able to connect to on campus, whoever that might be, just to make sure that they're able to build those relationships and connections before they get to campus once you hire them. That's also going to help with your onboarding process, which we'll also talk about later in our webinar as well. You also want to be honest about your organization in creating a culturally competent and inclusive organization. So you want to be honest to where you're at. CU Boulder is not perfect in this area by any means, so we're very honest with our candidates about, this is what your experience might be like when you come here, and this is what our goals are and what we're trying to do. And hopefully if that candidate is in line with those goals and has similar values, they'll want to work at your institution. So then our next slide here is really about coded language. So these are things just to bring up that we want to bring up throughout the interview process that you want to be aware of. So things like saying not a good fit, or I felt like, or I just had a feeling that, things like that, that the interviewer is not articulating why or why not the candidate should move forward. Really these terms in this list can be filled with bias, especially I hear a lot when people say, I have that gut feeling, or I just know they're not a good fit for our organization. you really want the interviewer to be able to articulate why or why not they want a candidate to move forward or not move forward in your process. That's really important, just to be aware of that bias piece and make sure we're not using our bias to make decisions on candidates and moving forward them in our selection system. So we spoke a lot about bias and how that can affect interviews. So I'm going to hand it back over to Alex to talk a little bit about how bias can show up in selection processes.
Thank you, Vicki. So as Vicki touched on, we're going to talk a little bit about bias in this next section. Unconscious biases are those that we are not even aware that we hold, and they can affect us despite our own self-affirmed identities, or despite what we might think. We might think, oh, actually, no, I am not biased in this area. I'm very passionate about X, Y, Z. And yet we can still be affected by unconscious biases. And particularly, researchers at Harvard developed the implicit association test to demonstrate that everyone, even people who strongly identify as being allies or identifying with certain groups, can hold biases against certain identities. And so I'll use myself as an example. I strongly associate as being a feminist. And yet when I take the implicit association test designed to evaluate women in the workplace, I hold a slight unconscious bias against women in the workplace, which was something that I really struggle with because that's not something that I really claim as part of my identity. But this just demonstrates how unconscious biases work and why they're so dangerous. Even if we actively disagree with the bias, we can still be socialized to hold certain biases. And so that's why it's so crucial, understanding what your personal biases are and figuring out how do you as a professional navigate them, and how do you have your organization navigate these biases as well. Linked on this PowerPoint, which will be sent to everyone after this, is just a great resource talking about common hiring biases. And this will be emailed out. And so there are many different kinds of biases that we might be completely aware of as interviewers. Research has shown that a group is more likely to hire someone if they're similar to themselves in identity or personality. Another bias, for example, is the halo effect. So if there's a candidate has one single attribute that makes them really stand out, the halo effect says that this one attribute will overshine all the rest, and so that makes you more inclined to like that candidate. And this works inverse when it works against the candidate. It's called the horn effect. So if the candidate has just one attribute that otherwise disqualifies like a very good skill set, that's something to take into account when you're talking about bias. And the reason we wanted to start off talking about unconscious biases is to stress that we all experience and exhibit bias. And that doesn't make you automatically a bad person. That doesn't mean that your hiring process is terrible. But what's important is, what do you do with that knowledge? How do you address your biases within yourself and within your organization? And so it's important to be aware that unconscious bias is really problematic, and it's going to inhibit us from hiring the best possible staff. And so it's really fundamental that you challenge your staff members to address this, because it can impact your ability to treat candidates fairly, which can impact the candidate being attracted to the institution. As Vicki was saying, it's good to keep in touch with candidates and build relationships. But if you're exhibiting certain behaviors that are unconsciously being biased against that candidate, that's something that they very well might feel and recognize, and so that's going to inhibit an equal process. It can also limit the way our organizations work and have a long-term impact on retention and the organizational climate. So it's really important to do things to combat bias. And there are great resources, particularly the implicit association test. There's even a video that has been put out that talks about this test and describes how it works. And it's really good for training staff. And so those are different things that you can do to explore addressing bias. I'm going to take a quick moment to address something, though, that Vicki mentioned, particularly when we talk about the word fit. So fit is a buzzword that we throw out often in student affairs, and we really have to be careful about what we really mean when we use that word. It's too easy to mean fitting in opposed to fitting with when we discuss our personnel. So when we talk about fitting in, what we really mean is we want someone who goes with our flow, who melds themselves with not only our organizational culture, but often they fit in with our social groups, or they're people we identify with. And we have to switch to a fitting with mindset. don't hire the person who fits the organizational culture or just will blend in and go with the flow. Hire the person who fits with it to make it better. And so this might mean hiring someone who will challenge the organizational culture in a way that will actually improve it. So if we think about this concept of fitting with versus fitting in, think of a puzzle. If you have pieces that only look like one another, you can never complete the puzzle and see the whole picture. So like fitting in might be you have a bunch of puzzle pieces that are all the same, and oh, you can categorize them in the same way. They are very easily identifiable for having certain traits. But when you talk about fitting with, what you need is different kind of puzzle pieces in order to piece together the whole picture. And so that's why choosing someone to fit with your organization as opposed to fitting in and being similar to everyone else is really crucial. Choosing the person who fits with the organizational culture will complete it and round it out in a way that's vastly different from someone who will fit in but never challenge the status quo. And our goal is ultimately to create an organization that is well-rounded and, like we said earlier, multiculturally competent. And sometimes that really requires having different perspectives or having someone who can point out things in ways that we've never seen it before. And so we're just to really hit home on the topic of bias, we're going to look at, for instance, who is the CEO? So this is what you're seeing on the screen is a picture of two different CEOs, Hillary Rowland, the CEO of NewFace.com, and Bill Gates, the CEO of Microsoft. And these pictures look vastly different. There is visible difference along the lines of gender, how people are dressed, what they're wearing, and like how they've styled themselves. And it's very easy within our culture to say, well, Bill Gates clearly looks like the CEO. But we have to challenge ourselves to really understand, well, what does it mean to look like a CEO? What coded language exists in that? What does it mean to be professional? Part of understanding bias is understanding what do we mean when we say those words? And is there only one definition of what professional looks like or what successful looks like? And so that's one of the reasons we wanted to highlight this picture, is to show that both of these people are very successful and professional in their own ways. And understanding what we mean by bias or checking your own bias is going to be crucial in hiring very qualified candidates who are diverse. And so we're going to move into the topic of onboarding next. But before we leave the topic of bias, we're going to connect bias in the interview process to bias when a candidate who maybe is successful and they are hired for your organization. What does that look like when they join your organization and they're being onboarded? A few things to be aware of are when you're onboarding a new candidate or a new employee, really think about the ways in which your current processes might be biased against them, and think about what you can do to make that onboarding process as safe and as comfortable and fun as possible. And so this includes things like avoiding stereotype threat, which is the experience or anxiety or concern in a situation where a person has the potential to confirm a negative stereotype about their social group. And this has been shown to reduce the performance of individuals who belong to negatively stereotyped groups. And so if negative stereotypes are present regarding a specific group, they're more likely to become anxious about their performance, which may hinder their ability to perform at their maximum level. So really making sure that the environment you're welcoming all candidates or all employees into is one that is safe, one that is comfortable, and one that makes people feel at home. Also addressing micro inequities within the workplace and microaggressions. So making sure that when you onboard candidates or when you onboard employees, when you introduce them to your organization, you are providing them with professional opportunities. You are providing them with equal opportunities to that of their other employees. And you're making sure that you address issues with them in an ongoing manner. So finding mentors or addressing like how comfortable they feel within the organization, onboarding them to the best of their ability, making sure that they feel comfortable in their professional career, that you are supporting them equally, just as you would any other employee. And these are all really important things to consider when you are onboarding someone. And I'm going to turn to Vicki to send us home with the last discussion of onboarding and retention.
So other things that you really want to consider in terms of once you have that employee hired, that's a crucial time period from the day that you offer them the position and they accept to the time they come on campus and those first few weeks on campus. So these are things that you can do. This is really for all new staff members, but for specifically an affirmative recruitment approach. So really sending welcome emails, notes, and cards. You want that employee to really be thankful that they chose your institution compared to other places that they were interviewing, and that they feel like they have a home there and that they're welcome there, especially if they're moving out of state or across the state for a position. You want to make sure that they feel like they have a place and that your organization is the right place for them. So something that we do is really when a candidate is hired and after their background check goes through, we basically send out their email as long as they're okay with that. So all of our staff, we have a tradition of really welcoming them and connecting with them before they even arrive on campus. Also providing new staff members with valuable information that they need for work, but then also for life. So one thing we do in my institution is really creating a welcome packet for new information for a wide variety of identities and interests and needs. So things like where do you get your hair cut? What kinds of professional organizations can you become involved in? Are there meetup groups to meet new people, or young professional organizations that people can join to get connected within the community? You also want to make an announcement to your organization, specifically if you can, to all of your student affairs departments, introducing your new staff member with a bio and a picture, possibly encouraging outreach, either for lunch or just to connect with people. A meet and greet upon arrival is really important, so having either a supervisor or a peer. I'm thinking specifically, especially live-in hall directors or hall staff, instead of having them kind of make their way to your campus and figuring it out, really having somebody to meet them at a specific location, meeting them at their apartment with a key, having, we call them moving parties here, where a lot of our staff, it's just a tradition that we all go and help that new person move in. It really provides that support and makes them feel welcome and wanted at your institution. Also providing a new employee with a mentor to assess them in their arrival and their first few days in town. So really helping them get to their first meeting, finding the grocery stores, finding restrooms in their building, and meeting places on campus. That's really important just to make them, again, feel connected. Another big piece of this is having a timeline for the employee's success. So developing a comprehensive training program is huge. So having that communication, making them feel at home, but then also having the training and the skills that you're developing is critical for their success at your organization. And really sharing with them some of those unwritten rules. So things like make sure you dress up on opening day, or this is how we communicate with parents. Those unwritten rules or culture of the organization that they might not know, it's important for them to understand before they start work in your organization. And then schedule ongoing meetings for continued support. Make sure you're following up with them in one-on-ones, making sure they're connected to the community outside of the institution, so it's not just about work, and that they're connected to the place that they live as well. And then one important piece of the comprehensive training program as well is considering mid-year hires. So I think a lot of times in residence life, or at least experiences I've had, is we have great training programs for those people that start with us in summer at the beginning of the academic year. And then we get so busy during the academic year that when new people come in, it's really hard to have them transition in with us. So you want to make sure you're thinking about all this throughout the year, and if somebody comes in October, whatever it is, we have that same plan in place to make them feel wanted and trained at the organization. Another piece is really asking yourself, are we ready for people of difference in our organization? You want to make sure that your unit, your residence life department is ready and that you've talked about this and brought up these conversations, or people will not stay. It's going to be really hard to retain them. And then a piece of, in terms of onboarding and retention, I think we could do probably a whole other webinar about this, but I think this is one of the most important pieces, is really just talking about difference. So my experience as a white female in my institution is going to be very different than a person of color. So really, instead of glossing over that or never bringing it up, it's important to have those conversations, especially with staff who maybe don't represent the majority of your staff or in the majority identity. One thing that we've been doing for the last couple of years at CU is called Going Deeper, and it's basically monthly sessions of conversations around social justice, around inclusion, and things like those microaggressions that could be happening or micro inequities. And we're really taking a look at our organization and seeing what kinds of things are happening that are not socially just. What kind of policies and practices do we have in place that could be marginalizing our students or our staff? So really just having those conversations is going to be huge. And not make excuses as to why something is happening and why those microaggressions are happening, but really talking about how to improve those or where our bias is creating those. And then making sure you're offering those professional development trainings, allowing your employees to connect with people in your organization and within student affairs at your institution, and having that opportunity to gain the skills that they need to get to the next level or where they want to go in their future. So that was a lot of information we know. So a little bit about onboarding retention. Like we said, we think we could talk a lot more about that, but we really just want to now turn it over to you and hear your questions about anything that we've talked about, whether it's affirmative recruitment, bias, or onboarding.
All right, so if you could just look at the chat box and type in your questions, that would be great. I think, thank you, Vicki and Alex, for providing that great depth of information for us. And I highly recommend the book. I also read it myself and did it in a presentation. So it's a very good book, Hiring and Retaining a Diverse Workforce. So do we have any questions at this point? And yes, it looks like we have a question. So let me just, we have, what are some of the intentional practices you use to find diverse staff? And this is from Athonia Prince. Thank you. Anyone
I would say,
take away, Vicki?
Sure. I would say some intentional practices are, I think, going back to that networking piece, I think that's really important. So really connecting with people who you want in your organization, who you think are missing from your organization, whether that's their identity, some experience that they have, anything like that, and then networking with them before a job is even posted. So going to conferences, professional development events across your state, or getting involved in state organizations or locally. And then once you identify people who you want in your organization, so really looking at those identities that you're missing, or maybe it's somebody's really passionate about inclusion and about creating inclusive communities for residents and residents' life. And you identify those people that you want in your organization. You want to start building a relationship with them, network with them, keep in touch with them. So one thing I've been trying to do is really just, I have a ton of business cards, and I just write on the business card when I'm at a conference or an event, and I can put, possible HD candidate, or maybe somebody for a higher level position, maybe one of our assistant director positions or associate director. So even if a position isn't open, really recruiting before the position's even posted. I think that because you really can't assume people's identities, and once you post that position, it's not like you can pick people to review resumes because of a certain last name or an identity that you're assuming they have. So what you really want to do is recruit before you end up posting that position. And then also, I think just looking at position description and really incorporating that multicultural language throughout is going to help you attract those people who do have that cultural competency and have that mindset and that passion. And you're going to attract those people to end up applying for your position.
I think another thing to consider, too, is that it's an ongoing process. And part of making your department look attractive is if you want to hire a diverse staff that understands social justice, your department does need to have some groundwork, and you need to be committed to that and do things that exemplify that. For instance, University of Arizona. Arizona as a state sometimes makes the news for not very positive reasons. And but we at the University of Arizona are very committed to social justice, and it's something that we're well regarded for, and that's a positive thing. That's a reason why we still do have a very good group of candidates applying at our institution, because it's something that we care about, and we know that it's part of our job to make an impact within the institution that can affect the larger community. And so being committed to social justice in more than just the language you use for interviews or hiring people, but just being committed to social justice in a variety of different ways within the department is also going to be really crucial in attracting good candidates to come to your institution.
Thank you for that, Alex. Well, it looks like that's the only question we had, which was a very good one. So thank you for answering that. So I want to thank you all for participating in our webinar. And don't forget to put in your school and the number of people that attended the webinar. Thank you for participating. And soon after this, you will be getting either a link to the PowerPoint or the webinar, since this has been recorded. And just keep an eye out for our next webinar, which is April 16th, and it's geared toward new professionals. So I want to thank you all, and have a good day.